Greetings mathematicians and welcome back. Today we are looking at dividing unit fractions and whole numbers. And this is our last week of Summer Math Bonanza. Let's take a look at and read the objective together. I will divide unit fractions and whole numbers by building on what I learned last week. Now the key here for unit fraction, so remember that uni means 1. So that prefix and the adjective here, unit, means 1 fraction. All right, and to be successful today, let's go ahead and read it one more time together. I will divide unit fractions and whole numbers by building on what I learned last week. All right. And speaking of last week, we have a couple of questions that we need to answer to be successful here. So what is a unit fraction? Keeping in mind, uni means 1. Well, that's going to be any fraction you run into where the numerator, or top number, is 1. So uni is referring to how many of the total pieces. So for this one, it would say, if I have one whole and it's split into 3 parts, I've only got one of the 3. That is a unit fraction. All right, next up, what do we do with whole numbers? If we run into the whole number of 8, what should we do with it? So if we're saying it's 8 times 1/2. Last week we talked about this. Those whole numbers, we need to put them over 1 because we are saying that there are 8 1/1s that we're adding up to get 8/1. And then we can simply solve and we get 8/2 is a correct answer. We divide down 8 divided by 2 equals 4. All right. And today, new question for you, something to think about. I'm going to define it for you, but I want you to figure out, what does it really mean? Okay? So here's the question. What is a reciprocal? It's a fun word. Say it with me. Reciprocal. All right, and let's look at our example problem. And as defined in the objective, we have a unit fraction, 1/3, and we have a whole number. So before we go into dividing this, think about what we learned last week. Unit fraction, whole number. What has to happen before we move on? 1/3, divide. What has to happen to that 5? It needs to be rewritten as 5/1. All right, so before we divide, before we multiply, our whole number always goes over 1. And once we've got it to this spot, we can move along. All right, and what we're going to do first is we're going to look at the concept of dividing fractions. And I'm going to give you 4 simple steps to solving dividing fraction problems. Once you've got those steps down, I'm going to show you why it works. All right, so let's rewrite our problem over here. And here are our 4 steps. Keep, change, flip, solve. Sometimes we can call solve multiply, but solving nonetheless. So let's start with our problem. 1/3 divided by 5/1. And when we're talking about keeping, we're talking about keeping the first fraction. Keep this one as it is. So we're not going to change anything about 1/3. Think of it like dance partners. When 2 people are dancing, there is typically one person that is leading when they're dancing, and that first fraction is going to lead the way. So we're going to keep it. Next up, we're talking change. We will change. So let's bring down that 1/3. What we're going to do is we're going to change division to multiplication. And last week we talked about inverse operations. The inverse or opposite of division is multiplication. All right? Next step, 1/3 times. We are going to flip the second, well, in this case, it's now a fraction. It started as a whole number, but we are going to flip it. It's not going to be 5/1 anymore. It's going to be 1/5. And I made a little error right there. When we flip the operation, we have to flip the second fraction. And this is what is called a reciprocal. All right. And once we've kept, changed, and flipped, we have a very, very simple multiplication problem. What's the answer? 1 times 1 is 1. 3 times 5 is 15. So, recap. Keep the first fraction, change the symbol to its reciprocal, flip the second fraction to 1/5, solve it or multiply, and we're done. 4 easy steps to remember, but let me show you why it works. But why? Why, Mr. McNeil? Why does it work? Let's look at the illustration here. This will represent our 1/3. And what we're doing is, our original problem stated 1/3 divided by 5. So what we're actually doing is, we're taking the whole thing and breaking it out. Even though we're focusing in on 1/3, we're saying I have 1/3 of, I don't know, 1/3 of the Pokemon cards, and I'm going to divide 1/3 by 5. So that would simply be 1 piece. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? So 1/3 divided by 5. Our answer isn't just about this one piece. Our answer needs to say, and we came up with 1/15. So our answer has to be, how much is the answer compared to the whole thing, not just our 1/3. So when we divide by 5, we're multiplying by 1/5. So we actually go through to all the pieces and split them into 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. So now, instead of just split into thirds, I have this split into 15ths. And how much of the 15th? What is 1/3 divided by 5? Your answer up here was 1/15. So we have 1 out of the whole thing is 1/15. All right. So you start with 1/3, and then you break up the parts individually. So that is why it works. If you can memorize the steps and utilize the steps, you'll get the right answer. But if you've got a visual model, you're going to have to know what it actually is asking you. All right. Well, good luck today on Prodigy. We'll look at a couple of sample problems during our meeting at 9 a.m. And I can't wait to see you. Have a great day.